Good morning, everyone. My name's Robin Shumays. I am a lifelong Prince fan, and my journey actually started with Vanity 6. So I'm like super, super, super excited to be presenting to you today. I have a lot of information in here, so I'm going to go really quickly. If you have any questions, just ask me later. But I just want to thank D'Angela for inviting me to come and be here in person. So let's just jump in and get started. Okay. Let's see. Like a nasty girls group, how Prince refashioned and reimagined the archetype of the all-girl singing group. In the beginning of the video for Vanity Six's biggest hit, Nasty Girl, starts with three beautiful women stepping into what appears to be a ladies' lounge of a nightclub. They're wearing matching form-fitting sheath dresses in different colors, not dissimilar from what many of the girl groups of the past worn in previous years. Halfway through the song, they go back behind the doors and return wearing lingerie and styles revealing who they are underneath. Susan, the Lolita, Brenda, the punk rocker, and Vanity, the sexy, badass vamp. If the lyrics hadn't already enlightened you, this wardrobe change was a definitive statement that this wasn't going to be just another girls' group. In 1982, I was 11 years old. My brother Dwayne, who was already a young adult by that time, had just started working at Warner Brothers Records. Dwayne worked in black music as a promoter, and soon after he got the job, he started a trend that, lucky me, would span all of the 80s. He would regularly send me promotional copies of all of the new R&B album releases. One day I came home from school, and there was a box from Dwayne with a few new albums, including ones by Vanity 6 and The Time. No 1999, don't know why. I was excited because I love Nasty Girl. My mom even loved Nasty Girl, and so she didn't seem to mind when I would just play it continuously. The ladies of Vanity Six were what I envisioned as the coolest of the cool girls. Not only beautiful, but could also take you down in a bar fight in their lingerie. For instance, on If a Girl Answers Don't Hang Up, Vanity gets into it on the phone with her boyfriend's new chick. Brenda steps in and proceeds to read said chick for filth, like a true ride or die. These ladies were not to be messed with. In 1982, I didn't know a lot about sex, but with Vanity Six or with Nasty Girl, I knew that for a fact that this song was sung in a way that only really boys did. And even though I couldn't articulate that on some level, I recognize that as a powerful affirmation. It would be easy to dismiss Vanity Six as being a vanity project, pun intended, for one, make that two of Prince's girlfriends, but there were some real gems within the sphere of the project that are such a departure from the typical girl groups that had come before. And I feel it's important to dissect how it all came together. With this presentation, I will give a brief history of the girl group and how the music of these female singers has always defined in the climate of the times. I will also touch on the significance of the civil rights movement and the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Then I will do a deep dive on the topic of blaxploitation films, all of these born from this movement, to show how they impacted young Prince's view of black male and female sexuality. I will also take a brief look at the punk scene and highlight some of the stylistic influences you may not have recognized. We'll also uncover how Prince used all of these components together to make a girls group reimagined. If you're old enough, you probably assume that the concept of the girl group, often configured as a trio, started in the 1960s with groups like the Supremes or the Shirelles. But the girl group can actually be traced back to the early 20th century, during the period known as the Jazz Age. Three of the first groups that reached prominence were the Brock sisters, the Three X sisters, and the Boswell sisters. One thing that seems apparent from the photos of these performers is that all of these girl groups tended to dress identically with slight variations. Nevertheless, the fashion sensibility of each group was very in vogue for the period. By the 1950s, African American singing groups made it to the forefront with a new style of music called doo-wop and its cousin, rock and roll. The first groups to become popular, like the Orioles and the Five Keys, were male, but by the end of the decade, women took center stage within the genre. The first two female doo-wop groups to have hit singles were the Bobettes and the Chantels. The general style for these groups reflected the demure elegance of the era. The 1980s fashion for women featured dresses with cinched bodices and full skirts, worn with a petticoat for more volume. But then a group called the Ronettes came through and changed the face and the fashion of popular music for their generation, and in my estimation, paved the way for a group like Vanity 6. The Ronettes were made up of sisters Veronica and Estelle Bennett and their cousin Nedra Talley. The girls came from a musical family and began singing together as children growing up in Spanish Harlem. As you may have noticed, the girl groups that were popular in the 30s and 40s were white. But as I mentioned, when doo-wop and rock and roll entered the scene in the 1950s, the girl group singers were black. The Ronettes, however, were of mixed heritage. Veronica and Estelle were black, Cherokee, and Irish. Nedra was black, Cherokee, and Puerto Rican. Their racial ambiguity automatically created an air of mystery around them, but also afforded them the luxury to play with their image and rebel against the prim and proper in a way that wouldn't have been acceptable coming from other female artists of color at the time. The early 1960s, as we know, was amongst the most turbulent times in American history. While leaders of the civil rights movement fought for equality, Motown Records' approach was to try and gain acceptance from white society by presenting artists as respectable, conformist to mainstream values. Excuse me. They enrolled performers in etiquette classes to help them portray a squeaky clean image on and off the stage. The Supremes, Motown's top girl group at the time, were a stark contrast to the Ronettes. Ronnie's voice was raw and gritty. Diana's was silky, smooth, and safe. The Ronettes wore mini dresses and bullet bras. The Supremes often performed in evening gowns. After after Estelle Bennett's passing in 2009, the New York Times eulogized her by pointing out her role in creating the look of the Ronettes. They wrote, Estelle played a critical part in the development of the Ronette style. The eldest of the group, she worked at Macy's and attended the Fashion Institute of Technology, and the look she helped devise for the group was all superlatives, bigger, badder, and sexier than anybody. Their heavy mascara, slit skirts, and piles of teased hair suggested both sex and danger. Fashion historians believe designer Mary Quant invented the miniskirt when she introduced it in her London boutique in 1965. But the Ronettes could be easily credited with coming up with the style. In Ronnie's memoir, she says, "We weren't afraid to be hot. That was our gimmick. When we saw the Shirelles walk on stage with their wide party dresses, we went in the opposite direction and squeezed our bodies into the tightest skirts we could find. Then we would go out on stage and hike them up even more to show our legs." Love her. Sorry, I didn't mean for that to be so loud. I'm just gonna let this play for a second. Oh, so this is a song that I just wanted you guys to hear a little bit of. The way Ronnie coos and sings seductively, I could never imagine that Diana Ross would sing like that, and I just wanted to point that out. She was definitely sexy. So moving on, the U.S. was still in a state of social and cultural upheaval as it moved to the 1970s. The most prominent figures of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, had been assassinated, and although laws against segregation and discriminatory voting practices had been passed, the movement reached a plateau which brought about deeper feelings of unrest. Nothing had truly changed. This unrest ignited what came to be known as the Black Power movement. Even though Prince didn't have the opportunity to write much in his memoir and the beautiful ones about how the movement affected him, there was the inclusion of pins that he wore during the time, including one that said Black Power. At the intersection of this deeper militancy within the civil rights movement was another movement, the sexual revolution. The widespread availability of birth control and the legalization of abortion brought forth a period of increased openness and liberalization of attitudes towards sex for the new generation of young adults. And with that came a rejection of social and cultural norms, such as abstinence before marriage and adhering to traditional gender roles. The sexual revolution had a profound impact on Western society, influencing everything from fashion and popular culture to politics and public health policy. A Black revolutionary movement happening in tandem with a newfound openness about sex planted the seed for a new genre of entertainment in the 1970s aimed specifically at African Americans, the blaxploitation film. The films emerged as a response to the Black Power movement and the idea that Black people should no longer accept white establishments that don't support them, in this case, Hollywood. So early directors of the genre sought to create their own films for their own people. Despite the low-budget production values and gritty cinematography, the majority of these films featured unlikely heroes fighting against oppression and corruption in their neighborhood. The films helped to reinforce aspects of Black empowerment and highlight a resistance to white authority. Just like the days of early hip hop, blaxploitation offered glimpses of what was the real life reality for some, but also offered hope by showing what fighting back against oppression could look like. In her paper, From the Violent Black Buck Stereotype to the Black Hero, Representations of African Americans and Black Masculinity in American Cinema, scholar Anna Kosick writes, Blaxploitation movies represent an important landmark because they introduce the possibility of a Black hero who confronts and defeats the corrupted system. But these films are not just about fighting oppression. One of the strongest arguments against these films has centered around sex. Critics have pointed out that many of the male lead characters are often violent, hypersexualized caricatures, and that this imagery perpetuates the racist narrative that Black men are aggressive and oversexed. In his dissertation, Blaxploitation Revolutionary Sexuality, author Austin D. Cook makes strong counter-arguments that to these critics and contends that these films deserve a closer analysis. Cook states, the way in which these films form their sexual imagery follows the influence they take from the Black Power movements in order to create an image of Black male sexuality that is revolutionary at its core. The filmmakers actively work to transcode traditional stereotypes of Black sexuality, turning the negative imaginings of hypersexuality and sexual ability into positive ones that subvert their original meanings. I think it's extremely important to consider how these films projected the mood of the communities and may have inspired young men of color, and most specifically, how they may have shaped Prince's ideology around Black masculinity and femininity through his teens, which took place in most of the 1970s. In his interview with Aisha K. Staggers, Andre Simone offered some perspective. Andre said, my brother Sonny, I swear they saw my brother and wrote Superfly, because that's who my brother was. Me and Prince, every day, we'd see him come in with 4 or 5 girls, and I'm telling you, people have no idea about the reality of the environment my family was living in. Obviously, I didn't go live with Prince. He came to live with me, and so he came and got exposed to a lifestyle that very few people knew existed. To come right into the lion's den of that reality is enough to change anybody. Last fall, I actually started watching a number of these films in order to do research for a new fashion collection that I'm creating dedicated to the genre. After watching a few, I began to notice some interesting connections that could easily be made between Prince's style over the years, but also the concept of Vanity 6. Around the same time, I watched Michael Dean's podcast episode on Prince's early style, and the panel made a direct connection to the film Superfly. From noting how much Prince resembled Superfly's lead actor Ron O'Neal, especially with his blowout, to the similarity of the cover of Purple Rain to the Superfly cover. The character, Prince's stunning wardrobe and car is something you could easily imagine Prince rocking with. It was fascinating to see that we were all on a similar wavelength when rethinking Prince's inspirations. NPR celebrated the film's 50th anniversary last summer and also noticed a connection. They said, even Prince's soft-spoken, inscrutable performance as the kid in Purple Rain feels like it owes some kind of debt to O'Neal's intense, enigmatic take on Priest. Although I haven't found concrete evidence that Prince was a fan of the film, the fact that the soundtrack was one of the best soul albums of all time tells me that he was probably into it. 2 of the most prominent actresses of the genre were Pam Grier, who starred in Coffee and Foxy Brown, and Tamara Dobson, who starred in Cleopatra Jones and its sequel, Cleopatra Jones and the Casino of Gold. Grier and Dobson's films pioneered the concept of the female action heroine in the West. In the paper Black Women in Liberation and Blaxploitation Film, Alex Tambo asserts that films like Coffee and Foxy Brown were well-intentioned, but were actually detrimental to the ideals of what Black female liberation is supposed to be. But I feel Mr. Tambo misses the point. Black women consistently deal with trauma, and a Black woman who rises and enables herself to fight back and win is in fact liberated. Pam's character have agency over their beauty and sexuality. They were strong and they would not accept victimization. A counter-analysis of Pam Grier's films could easily be centered around the prevalence of the deep sexism and abuse that she endured from both black and white men, and that her characters endure from black and white men, and and how she had to navigate that in order to achieve her goal of bettering her community. Another one of the common female archetypes in blaxploitation is the madam, a woman who runs a brothel or manages a family of prostitutes. One great example is Nichelle Nichols in her excellent portrayal of Dorinda in the film Truck Turner, also starring Isaac Hayes. Nichelle's wardrobe for the film is just as stunning as Ron O'Neal's in Superfly. Producers clearly wanted to make a statement about the financial stature of the characters, like Priest and Dorinda, through their attire. In one scene, she has the hot mamas of the brothel parade around her clients while she highlights their attributes. Each of these women represent the sub-archetypes of female characters in these films: the sexy white girl, the exotic other, the sweet young thing. And each of these archetypes could be seen in Vanity 6. Not long after securing his own record deal and releasing his first albums, Prince began to set the wheels in motion for creating his own music multiverse. Recently, in a podcast with Purple Rain co-star Apollonia, Susan Moonsey recalled how she and her sisters met Prince in 1979 when she was just 15 years old. As soon as he saw her, he said, "There goes my girl group." Susan said she didn't take it seriously, even as Prince began scheduling photo shoots and filming videos. She couldn't imagine herself and her sister getting involved in the entertainment business, especially not after he proposed naming the group the Hookers. But Prince persisted. Then when Prince met Denise Matthews, a model and singer and actress from Canada, he made her lead singer and renamed her Vanity, but not before telling her about the hookers and suggesting the name Vagina. Thankfully, she said absolutely not. If you consider for a moment the influences of movies like Superfly, with the real-life example in Andre's brother, it's not beyond comprehension to imagine that on some level Prince saw himself that way. The hustler pimp had all the girls, the best clothes, the best cars, all the money, and was controlling the show. If the girls in V6 were the hookers, then what would that make Prince? I believe he fancied the answer. The characters of Vanity, Susan, and Brenda could have easily been characters in your average blaxploitation film. Think of the archetypes and sub-archetypes I mentioned earlier. Vanity is the leader, the madam, and the hot mama. Brenda as the sexy white girl, because there were at least one of them in every movie, and Susan, the young exotic plaything. The women did have a say on the creation of their persona, however. On Apollonia's podcast, Susan said, "I think we were all basically those characters, and he just emphasized them." I recently spoke to Jill Jones, and I asked her about the origins of wearing lingerie on stage. She told me, "So there was always this scenario of being in your lingerie. All you have to do is look at Gail Chapman. She was wearing like a camisole, right? And so Gail, if I'm not mistaken, was the first incarnation of that. And I think it was there in the punk scene. She told me to check out the band The Runaways." I love The Runaways now. What I found is that Runaways lead singer Cherry Curry regularly performed their song Cherry Bomb in a camisole and garter belt. I also found countless photos of young punk women hanging out in the scene dressed in camisoles. Jill also told me that Prince really watched the punk scene, London fashion designers, and the work of stylist and designer Maripol during that time. She said Prince was really hooked on fashion and was really looking at it. He was looking outside the circles, and he brought it to the Black community and into our circles. There should be no mystery as to why Prince was drawn to the punk movement. Although punk evolved among the kids of the British white working class, it comes from a similar political statement as the Black Power movement, to stick it to the man. Punk kids pushed the boundaries and created a new kind of fashion and politically charged music that was raw and expressed their disillusionment with the political and social climate they lived in. That message seemed to resonate with Prince, who was always looking to push boundaries. So why is this important? Prince's revolution was a rejection of the power structure, which is a direct connection to punk, Black Power, and the sexual revolution. One of the ways we see this was in his complete freedom of expression around sexuality in his early career, and how he then projected that freedom onto his modern-day girls group Vanity 6, with his statement on what a modern 80s woman could and should be. Owner of her sexuality and not about to take shit from anyone. The influence of Vanity 6 is immeasurable, from TLC, who expressed their sexuality unapologetically with their individual characters of crazy, sexy, and cool, to Beyonce, who started with a girl group and later, as a soloist, presented us with Naughty Girl, which is a nod not only to Donna Summer, but to Vanity 6, right down to the garter belt she wears in the video. Vanity 6 was so special to me that I've carried the feeling of wanting to be like them since 1982. And if Nasty Girl comes on when I'm at a party, you best move aside. That's all I'm saying. Thank you. I just want to say this is dedicated to my brother, Dwayne, who passed away in 2014, and to, of course, to Prince and Denise. Thank you.
Let's give her another hand. I must confess, I hope Robin doesn't get mad with me. So Robin did not want to go first, and I wanted her to go first because I knew that she was going to set the tone for today, and she was going to raise that bar high, and you just did. So everybody better start rewriting their presentations to make sure you can get where Robin went. So thank you so much.